There are unseen forces shaping your life right now, and most of the time you don't even realize they exist. That's precisely what makes them so powerful. You believe your decisions are logical. Your hesitation feels reasonable. Your caution seems justified. Yet beneath the surface, something deeper is quietly influencing the choices you make. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like your own mind. It sounds like your own reasoning, your own voice, your own conclusions. And because of that, you rarely question it. You assume every hesitation is valid, every delay is necessary, every doubt is telling you the truth. But if you look carefully, you'll notice the same patterns repeating throughout your life. The opportunities you delay, the decisions you postpone, the risks you avoid, even when a part of you already knows you should move forward. And every time there is a reason that makes the hesitation feel justified. You tell yourself you're simply being careful. You say move forward. And every time there is a reason that makes the hesitation feel justified. You tell yourself you're simply being careful. You say you're waiting for the right moment. You convince yourself you need more clarity, more time, more certainty. And while that sounds responsible, it is also how progress quietly gets postponed again and again. Because fear does not always appear as fear. The most dangerous forms arrive calmly. They do not come with panic or urgency. They arrive with logic, explanation, and convincing reasons. They disguise themselves as intelligence, preparation, and realism. That is why they are so difficult to detect. Over time, these hidden influences begin shaping your identity. You start believing you are simply someone who waits, someone who hesitates, someone who plays it safe, and that belief becomes the filter through which you view every opportunity that enters your life. Most people never escape this cycle because they never realize it, and that belief becomes the filter through which you view every opportunity that enters your life. Most people never escape this cycle because they never realize it exists. They assume they lack confidence, discipline, or motivation. But the deeper issue lies beneath awareness itself. Something hidden is quietly guiding their choices. And here's the truth that changes everything. These forces follow patterns. They are not random. They appear in predictable ways at predictable moments, influencing specific types of decisions. Once you begin noticing them, you start seeing how often they have been there. Think about the last time you held yourself back. The last time hesitation stopped you. The last time you talked yourself out of doing something you truly wanted to pursue. That moment did not appear from nowhere. It was part of a repeating pattern. Yet instead of recognizing it, most people accept it. They treat it as part of their personality. And because of that, they spend years trying to move forward. Yet instead of recognizing it, most people accept it. They treat it as part of their personality. And because of that, they spend years trying to move forward while something inside them continues quietly pulling them backward. That is why effort alone is not enough. You can work harder, become more disciplined, and set larger goals. But if these hidden forces remain in control, they will continue directing your actions without you even realizing it. The true shift happens when you stop focusing only on what you want to achieve and begin examining what has been controlling you. Because once you identify it, it stops appearing as truth and starts revealing itself as a pattern that can be broken. There are 6 of these patterns, 6 forms of fear that shape the way you think, act, and determine how far you are willing to go. Each operates differently. Each appears in different circumstances, yet together they quietly shape the lives of most people. And until you see them clearly, they will continue operating beneath the surface, guiding your decisions in ways that feel normal while keeping you limited. That is why so many people remain stuck without understanding why. But the moment you recognize these patterns, something begins to change. You start catching them in real time. You begin questioning thoughts you once accepted automatically. You separate what is true from what has been holding you back. And that awareness alone begins weakening their grip. Because fear cannot control what it can no longer hide. It has been holding you back. And that awareness alone begins weakening their grip. Because fear cannot control what it can no longer hide. The moment you see it clearly, it loses the power it once held over your decisions. So if you have ever felt as though something invisible has been limiting you, as though you are capable of more but continue holding yourself back, there is a reason for that. Not a flaw, not a weakness, but a pattern that can be understood and removed. And once you understand it, you will realize the greatest obstacle you have faced. You understand it, you will realize the greatest obstacle you have faced was never outside of you. It was something quieter, something hidden, something that loses its power the moment you finally recognize it for what it truly is. There are forces that influence a man's life without ever announcing themselves. They do not arrive with warning, nor do they demand attention with urgency. Instead, they move quietly, shaping thought in such a way that the man believes he is acting entirely through his own judgment. He feels composed. He feels rational. He feels in control. Yet beneath that sense of control, there is a subtle influence directing his decisions. This is the nature of concealed fear. It does not present itself as something to resist. It presents itself as something to trust. The man does not feel held back. He feels careful. He does not believe he is avoiding action. He believes he is preparing wisely. And through this belief, he accepts delay without question. That is why it becomes so powerful. Anything that appears as one's own reasoning is rarely examined. The man listens to his thoughts and assumes they serve his best interest. He does not question where they come from. He does not consider that something beneath awareness may be shaping them. And so, the influence remains hidden, and what remains hidden cannot be challenged. Consider the moment when opportunity appears. The man feels the desire to move forward, the instinct that action should be taken. Yet almost immediately, another thought enters. It speaks, opportunity appears. The man feels the desire to move forward, the instinct that action should be taken. Yet almost immediately, another thought enters. It speaks calmly. It offers explanation. It suggests that more time is needed, more clarity, more preparation. The man listens, and because the voice sounds reasonable, because it does not feel like fear, he accepts it. He steps back, not through panic, but through logic. This is how progress becomes delayed, not through force, but through persuasion. The most dangerous forms of fear do not create urgency. They create comfort. They allow the man to feel intelligent while remaining still. He does not feel weak. He feels responsible. He does not feel afraid. He feels cautious. And through this transformation, fear becomes invisible. Most men live within this condition without ever recognizing it. They move through life making decisions that appear justified while producing the same outcome repeatedly. Most men live within this condition without ever recognizing it. They move through life making decisions that appear justified while producing the same outcome repeatedly. Opportunities are postponed, risks are avoided, action is delayed, and every time there is a reason that makes it appear sensible. The man tells himself he is waiting for the right moment, that he is being careful, that he is avoiding unnecessary loss. And while each explanation sounds reasonable, the pattern never changes. He does not move, he does not advance, he does not expand. Yet he does not see this as failure. He sees it as discipline. This is the deception. For the mind, when influenced by hidden fear, does not present falsehood as falsehood. It presents it as truth. The man believes he is making wise decisions. He trusts his hesitation. He defends his delay. And by doing so, he strengthens the very force limiting him. Others may observe this without fully understanding it. They will see a man who is thoughtful, yet not progressing, intelligent, yet not advancing, someone who speaks of plans, yet rarely acts upon them. They may describe him as careful, deliberate, patient. Yet beneath these descriptions lies a quieter reality. He is governed not by lack of ability, but by unseen influence. This influence becomes stronger through repetition. Each time the man accepts delay as reasonable, he reinforces the pattern. Each time he justifies hesitation, he strengthens the belief that hesitation is correct. Over time, this becomes identity. He no longer sees himself as someone who is holding back. He sees himself as someone who thinks carefully, someone who waits for the right time, someone who refuses to act without certainty. And because this identity feels intelligent, he never questions it. This is how limitation becomes permanent, not through force, but through acceptance. It must be understood that the mind can create reasons for nearly any action or inaction. It can justify movement and justify stillness. It can support courage and support retreat. The difference lies not within the reasoning itself, but within what is influencing it. When fear operates unseen, reasoning becomes its instrument. It shapes the explanation. It determines the conclusion. It guides the decision. And because the reasoning sounds convincing, the man follows it without resistance. Its instrument. It shapes the explanation. It determines the conclusion. It guides the decision. And because the reasoning sounds convincing, the man follows it without resistance. Therefore, the first step toward freedom from this influence is recognition. The man must begin questioning not only what he thinks, but why he thinks it. He must observe his patterns. He must notice where delay repeats, where hesitation appears, where opportunity is consistently postponed. He must ask himself, is this truly reason, or is it something else speaking through reason? That question alone begins weakening the influence. For what is examined cannot remain hidden, and what is no longer hidden begins losing its power. The man will begin noticing that many of his thoughts follow familiar patterns, that hesitation appears during similar moments, that the same explanations return in different situations. And through this observation, he begins seeing structure where he once saw randomness. This is the beginning of awareness. He no longer accepts every thought as truth. He observes, he questions, he separates himself from automatic reaction. This separation is critical because it allows him to choose. Before, he reacted automatically. Now he considers. And within that consideration, he gains control. It must also be understood that allows him to choose. Before, he reacted automatically. Now he considers. And within that consideration, he gains control. It must also be understood that this process does not eliminate fear immediately. It reveals it. And through revealing it, its influence weakens. The man may still feel hesitation, he may still hear the same reasoning, but now he sees it, he recognizes it, and because he recognizes it, he is no longer controlled by it in the same way. This produces change, slowly at first, then more clearly. He begins acting where he once delayed. He begins questioning where he once accepted. He begins moving where he once remained still. Others will notice this transformation. They will see that he becomes more decisive, that he hesitates less, that he moves with greater certainty. They may believe he has gained confidence. Yet what he has truly gained is awareness, and awareness creates control. Thus, the silent influence begins to weaken, not because it disappears, but because it can no longer remain hidden. The man has brought it into the light, and within that light it loses its disguise. It no longer appears as pure reason. It is seen for what it truly is, something that once guided him without question, but now must be examined. This is the beginning of mastery, not over the world, but over the unseen forces within. And let him affirm with calm certainty, I question the thoughts that delay me. I see beyond what appears reasonable, and I act according to truth, not hidden influence. And I act according to truth, not hidden influence. There is another force that quietly shapes a man's life, not through fear alone, but through familiarity. It is the tendency to remain attached to what is known, even when the known no longer serves growth. The mind finds comfort in repetition. It prefers predictable patterns, familiar environments, and routines that require little uncertainty. And because of this, many men remain connected to conditions that limit them simply because those conditions feel familiar. The man may recognize that his current path no longer fulfills him. He may sense that greater opportunity exists beyond his present situation. Yet despite this awareness, he remains where he is. Not because he lacks ability, but because the unknown creates discomfort. Familiar struggle often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. This is how stagnation becomes accepted, that starting again would be difficult, that remaining may be wiser. And while these thoughts appear practical, they often conceal something deeper: the desire to avoid uncertainty, the desire to remain within what feels emotionally predictable. Over time, this attachment to familiarity begins shaping his entire life. He repeats the same routines, engages in the same patterns, surrounds himself with the same limitations. And because these conditions become normal, he stops recognizing how much they are restricting him. What once felt temporary becomes permanent through repetition. Others may observe this condition without fully understanding it. They will see a man with potential who never fully extends himself, greater things yet unwilling to leave behind what is comfortable. They may describe him as stable, practical, realistic, yet beneath that appearance lies hesitation disguised as wisdom. The man who overcomes this influence understands something important. Growth and familiarity rarely exist together. To become more, he must be willing to step beyond what feels safe. He must accept that discomfort is often evidence of expansion. The unknown is not always danger, it is possibility. This realization changes the way he responds to uncertainty. He no longer interprets discomfort as a signal to retreat. Instead, he begins recognizing it as a natural part of advancement. He understands that every new level of growth requires leaving behind of himself. And because of this understanding, he becomes willing to move even when certainty is absent. At first, this movement feels unnatural. The mind resists it. Old patterns attempt to pull him backward toward familiarity. Thoughts arise, suggesting that perhaps he should return to what is comfortable, what is predictable, what requires less risk. Yet the man who continues forward begins discovering something powerful. His capacity expands through exposure. What once felt uncomfortable slowly becomes normal, and through repeated movement into uncertainty, resilience. He no longer depends upon familiarity for stability. He creates stability within himself. This is a critical transformation. For the man who depends entirely upon external comfort becomes controlled by it. He organizes his life around avoiding discomfort. He limits his actions to preserve emotional predictability, and in doing so, he limits his growth. But the man who learns to remain steady within to expand. Others will begin noticing this change. They will see that he no longer resists challenge in the same way, that he enters unfamiliar situations with greater calm, that he adapts more quickly than before. They may assume he has become less. Yet what has truly changed is his relationship with uncertainty. He no longer requires complete familiarity before moving forward. He trusts his ability to adapt, and that trust creates strength. For life itself is movement. Circumstances change, opportunities shift, conditions evolve. The man who refuses change becomes rigid, and rigidity eventually breaks under pressure. But the man who learns to move with becomes adaptable, and adaptability creates endurance. It must also be understood that familiarity can exist not only in environments, but in ideas. Many men remain attached to old versions of themselves long after those versions no longer serve their future. They continue thinking the same thoughts, repeating the same stories, defining themselves by past limitations. And because they remain psychologically connected to who they were, they struggle to become who they could be. The man must therefore examine not only his environment, but his identity. He must ask, have I continued simply because they are familiar? What limitations have I accepted because they feel comfortable? What version of myself am I still protecting? These questions reveal where growth has been resisted. For transformation requires release. The man cannot fully step into a greater future while remaining attached to an outdated self. He must allow old identities, old patterns, and old limitations to dissolve, not through force, but through conscious movement beyond them. This process is not always comfortable. At times, it creates uncertainty. At times, it creates emotional resistance. Yet within that discomfort lies expansion. The man begins realizing that he is capable of adapting far beyond what he once believed. He discovers that confidence is not built by remaining within the familiar. It is built by repeatedly surviving what once felt uncertain. And through this process, a new identity begins to form. The man no longer sees himself as someone who avoids discomfort. He sees himself as someone who grows through it. He no longer waits for certainty before moving. He creates certainty through movement itself. Thus, the attachment to familiarity, not because familiarity disappears, but because it no longer defines the limits of the man's actions. He becomes capable of entering new environments, pursuing larger goals, and accepting greater challenges without retreating into old patterns. This is freedom, not freedom from uncertainty, but freedom from being controlled by it. The man no longer organizes his life around avoiding discomfort. He organizes it around growth, purpose, and expansion. And in doing so, he moves into levels of possibility that once seemed unreachable. Let him then examine where familiarity has been keeping him still. Let him recognize where comfort has become confinement. Let him move beyond the patterns that no longer serve his advancement. For within that movement, he will discover strength he could never find by remaining where he was, and let him affirm with steady conviction. I do not remain confined by what is familiar. I grow beyond comfort. There is yet another influence that quietly weakens a man's progress, though few recognize it while it is happening. It is the habit of scattering attention, the inability to remain directed long enough for effort to produce depth. In a world filled with constant stimulation, endless information, and continuous distraction, the mind becomes fragmented, and a fragmented mind struggles to create meaningful advancement. The man begins many things but completes few. He moves from idea to idea, from goal to goal, from one source of excitement to the next. At first, this appears productive. He feels active. He feels engaged. He feels as though he is searching for the right path. Yet beneath this movement lies instability. For progress requires continuity. Growth demands sustained focus. A man cannot build strength while constantly abandoning direction. And yet many do not realize how often distraction has become their escape from difficulty. The moment effort becomes demanding, attention shifts elsewhere. The moment progress slows, a new idea appears more appealing. This is how distraction quietly prevents mastery. The man mistakes movement for advancement. He confuses stimulation with purpose. He believes that because he is constantly thinking, planning, consuming, or preparing, he is progressing. Yet true progress is not measured by activity alone. It is measured by sustained direction over time. Consider the individual who begins a meaningful pursuit. At first, his energy is strong. He is motivated. He imagines future success. But after some time, repetition enters the process. The work becomes less exciting. Results remain incomplete. The mind begins searching for novelty. Another opportunity appears. Another idea promises faster reward. And because the new path feels easier emotionally, he abandons the old one before it has time to mature. Then the pattern repeats again. Each unfinished effort weakens his trust in himself. Each abandoned direction reinforces inconsistency. Over time, he begins believing that he lacks discipline, when in reality he has trained himself to escape discomfort through distraction. This condition has become increasingly common. Many men no longer struggle with lack of opportunity. They struggle with excess input. Their attention is constantly divided. Their thoughts are interrupted before depth can form. Their minds become conditioned to seek immediate stimulation rather than sustained effort. The consequence is subtle but severe. The man loses his ability to remain fully present with difficulty. He becomes restless during silence, impatient during repetition, uncomfortable during slow progress. And because all meaningful achievement requires periods of monotony, delay, and sustained concentration, he weakens his ability to advance deeply in any direction. Others may observe this pattern without fully understanding it. They will see someone with intelligence and ambition who nevertheless remains inconsistent, someone with many ideas but few completed results, someone constantly beginning but rarely finishing. They may describe him as distracted, unfocused, or indecisive. Yet beneath all of these lies an undisciplined relationship with attention itself. The man who overcomes this influence understands that attention is power. Wherever attention is directed repeatedly, energy follows. And wherever it is directed repeatedly, energy follows. And wherever energy flows consistently, growth occurs. Because of this, he becomes protective of his focus. He no longer allows every impulse, distraction, or momentary desire to determine his direction. This does not mean he ignores opportunity. It means he develops the ability to remain committed long enough for results to emerge. He understands that mastery requires repetition. Depth requires patience. Excellence requires sustained effort beyond the point where excitement fades. At first, this discipline feels difficult. The mind resists stillness. It seeks stimulation. It searches for escape from repetition. Yet the man who remains steady through this resistance develops something rare: mental endurance. He strengthens his ability to stay present even when progress appears slow. And through this stay present even when progress appears slow. And through this endurance, his work deepens. His thoughts become clearer. His actions become more deliberate. He no longer moves impulsively between countless directions. He begins moving with precision. This creates momentum. For scattered effort produces scattered results, but focused effort compounds over time. It must also be recognized that distraction often disguises itself as productivity. The man convinces himself that constant consumption of information equals growth. He continues watching, reading, researching, planning. Yet there comes a point where preparation becomes avoidance. The mind continues gathering knowledge without applying it. This creates the illusion of advancement while action remains absent. The man feels mentally occupied, yet externally unchanged. And because learning without execution produces little transformation, frustration eventually follows. He wonders why understanding has not translated into progress. The answer is simple. Information alone does not create change. Applied action does. The man must therefore learn the difference between consuming and creating, between thinking and executing, between movement and direction. These distinctions are essential, for without them, attention becomes scattered across endless possibilities while no single path receives enough energy to fully develop. As the man strengthens his focus, something else begins to occur. He becomes less emotionally reactive. He no longer chases every impulse. He no longer abandons direction whenever discomfort appears. Instead, he develops stability, and stability creates consistency. Others will begin noticing this transformation. They will see that he follows through more often, that his actions carry greater intention, that he no longer appears mentally divided. They may assume he has become more disciplined. In truth, he has simply learned to direct his attention consciously instead of surrendering it unconsciously. This shift changes everything, for a focused mind becomes difficult to disturb. The man gains clarity because his energy is no longer fragmented across endless distractions. He begins finishing what he starts. He develops trust in his own consistency, and from that trust, confidence naturally grows. Thus, distraction loses its control, not because the world becomes quieter, but because the man becomes more selective about what receives his attention. He understands that every distraction carries a hidden cost. It steals depth, it weakens continuity, it interrupts momentum. And because he understands this, he guards his direction carefully. He chooses what deserves his focus. He commits to meaningful effort long enough for growth to occur. And through that commitment, he separates himself from those who remain trapped in endless cycles of scattered attention. Let him then examine where his focus has been divided. Let him recognize where distraction has replaced discipline, where stimulation has replaced purpose, where constant movement has prevented meaningful progress. Let him reclaim authority over his attention and direct it toward what truly matters. For a man who controls his attention eventually controls the direction of his life. And let him affirm with unwavering clarity, I direct my focus with intention. I do not abandon my path for distraction. Through sustained effort and disciplined attention, I create depth, consistency, and lasting progress. There is another limitation that quietly controls the lives of many men, though it rarely appears in obvious form. It is the dependence upon external conditions for internal stability, the belief that peace, confidence, motivation, or direction must first come from the outside before action can begin. And because of this belief, the man becomes emotionally dependent upon circumstance. When conditions are favorable, he feels strong. When circumstances become difficult, he weakens. His mindset rises and falls according to events beyond his control. One moment he is motivated, the next he feels uncertain. One success gives him confidence. One setback removes it. In this condition, his inner state is constantly reacting to the external world. This creates instability. For the external world is never fully predictable. Circumstances shift, people change, outcomes fluctuate. And the man who depends entirely upon external conditions for internal direction, people change, outcomes fluctuate. And the man who depends entirely upon external conditions for internal direction becomes vulnerable to every change around him. His focus breaks easily. His emotions become inconsistent. His progress slows whenever life becomes uncomfortable. At first, he may not recognize this pattern. He believes his reactions are natural. He tells himself that anyone would feel discouraged under such conditions. Anyone would lose momentum after disappointment. Anyone would hesitate after failure. And while these responses may be common, repetition turns them into habit. Over time, the man begins surrendering authority over his emotional state. He waits to feel motivated before acting. He waits to feel confident before moving forward. He waits for the environment to improve before committing fully to his goals. Yet because conditions are rarely perfect for long, his consistency disappears. This is the hidden danger of emotional dependence. The man becomes controlled by circumstance without realizing it. His actions are no longer directed by purpose. They are directed by mood, and moods shift constantly. One difficult conversation changes his energy. One obstacle interrupts his discipline. One moment of discomfort weakens his direction. Others may observe this condition without understanding its source. One moment of discomfort weakens his direction. Others may observe this condition without understanding its source. They will see a man who appears determined at times, yet inconsistent over time. Someone who begins with intensity but struggles to sustain it. Someone whose effort changes according to how he feels. They may describe him as unmotivated or unreliable. Yet beneath these patterns lies emotional dependence upon circumstance. The man who overcomes this condition develops something different. He learns to create stability internally rather than seeking it externally. He no longer requires perfect conditions to remain disciplined. He no longer depends upon temporary emotion to sustain action. Instead, he builds direction through commitment. This is an important distinction. Emotion is temporary. Commitment is deliberate. The man who relies only upon emotion will act inconsistently because emotion changes daily. But the man who acts through commitment only upon emotion will act inconsistently because emotion changes daily. But the man who acts through commitment continues even when motivation fades. He understands that progress cannot depend entirely upon how he feels in the moment. At first, this requires effort. The mind resists action during discomfort. It seeks relief. It searches for reasons to delay. Yet the man who continues acting despite emotional fluctuation develops inner stability. He begins proving to himself that his actions are not controlled entirely by circumstance. Proving to himself that his actions are not controlled entirely by circumstance. This realization creates strength. He sees that discipline is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to maintain direction despite difficulty. And once this understanding deepens, something changes within him. He becomes less reactive to temporary setbacks. Challenges still appear, but they no longer determine his identity or his momentum. He understands that external events are often temporary, while internal direction can remain constant. This allows him to continue moving even during uncertainty, disappointment, or emotional discomfort. And through this consistency, he begins building trust in himself. That trust becomes powerful. For many men lose confidence not because they fail, but because they repeatedly abandon themselves whenever circumstances become difficult. Each time they retreat, they weaken belief in their own reliability. Circumstances become difficult. Each time they retreat, they weaken belief in their own reliability. But the man who remains steady during difficulty creates the opposite effect. He strengthens self-respect. Others will begin noticing this difference. They will see that he remains composed under pressure, that he continues acting even when conditions are imperfect, that he no longer appears emotionally controlled by every external event. They may assume he has become emotionally detached. Yet what he has truly developed is emotional discipline. He no longer gives every circumstance authority over his state of mind. He experiences emotion, yet he does not become governed by it. He feels disappointment without surrendering direction. He experiences doubt without abandoning purpose. He encounters difficulty without losing himself within it. This creates resilience, not the ability to avoid hardship, but the ability to remain grounded while moving through it. This creates resilience, not the ability to avoid hardship, but the ability to remain grounded while moving through it. And resilience changes the way a man approaches life. He no longer waits for the world to become easier before he acts. He strengthens himself so that he can move through difficulty without breaking. It must also be recognized that external validation often strengthens emotional dependence. The man begins relying upon praise, approval, recognition, or visible success to feel valuable. When recognition appears, he feels worthy. When it disappears, he questions himself. In this condition, his identity becomes dependent upon response from others. But the man who develops internal stability no longer requires constant validation to continue. He values progress even when it is unseen. He continues working even when recognition is absent. He understands that meaningful growth often occurs quietly before it becomes visible externally. This independence creates freedom. For the man is no longer emotionally controlled by applause or criticism, success or setback, comfort or discomfort. His direction becomes rooted in something deeper than temporary circumstance. As this stability grows, his actions become more consistent. His mind becomes calmer. His decisions become clearer. He wastes less energy. Actions become more consistent. His mind becomes calmer. His decisions become clearer. He wastes less energy reacting emotionally to every fluctuation around him. Instead, he directs that energy toward purposeful movement. And through this process, he develops quiet confidence. Not confidence built upon perfect conditions, but confidence built upon the knowledge that he can remain steady even when conditions are imperfect. This is far more powerful, for life will always contain uncertainty. The question is not whether difficulty will appear, but whether the man will remain directed when it does. Thus, emotional dependence begins losing its influence, not because challenges disappear, but because the man no longer allows them to determine his actions. He becomes anchored internally rather than externally, and from that stability, sustained progress becomes possible. Let him then examine where his emotional state has been controlled by circumstance. Becomes possible. Let him then examine where his emotional state has been controlled by circumstance. Let him recognize where mood has replaced discipline, where temporary feelings have interrupted long-term direction. Let him strengthen the ability to remain committed even when emotion fluctuates. For the man who masters his internal state gains authority over his external direction. And let him affirm with calm certainty, I do not depend upon circumstance for direction. I remain steady through discomfort, disciplined through uncertainty, and committed regardless of temporary emotion. Through inner stability, I create lasting progress. Through inner stability, I create lasting progress.